Welcome back to the Between Breaths podcast. Jacko here, and it is Jacko alone. Not necessarily a guest, but I'm going to be joined by a piece of research so that we can look at what is best for recovery. And I'm going to pick it apart a little bit and try to draw more out about this. A lot of interest in this area. Because the type of thing that we see often these days is, in my view, a little bit unscientific at times, the way that we're interpreting scientific studies and literature, and ultimately that like human nature to sort of want to just go, I want a black and white answer, like what is best. And we're going to look at a specific study that's going to tell us a little bit of stuff, but equally, I think what it doesn't tell us as well is really interesting. And I will share with you what I've done, how I've interpreted it, just my view, my opinion, but with a lens on it of this is what I'm seeing and this is what I'm using with the professional and international athletes that I'm training. And hopefully it will give you a better insight into how you will utilize some of this information for your own recovery when you want to try and potentially make your recovery easier or faster or better. That's good. But what about when I want to challenge my recovery so I become better at recovering? So we will look at all of that, and I may even have a little bit of a rant within it. So before we just get started, to thank the sponsors of the podcast, HVMN, Ketone IQ. They come in these little shot sizes, or I actually really like the concentrated one. But essentially, these are ketones that are a great fuel source that cross the blood-brain barrier. They're fantastic for brain health, which is one of the reasons I looked at it initially. But then a little bit like breathing, which I looked at that initially for brain health perspectives. This is something it's probably gone on a year now since I started using Ketone IQ. Love it for concentration, focus, and that brain health side of it. Notice a real benefit with my sleep, but then also a bit like with breathing, started off like that for me, but seeing how breathing can influence performance. Same thing with these, utilizing some of this alongside some hydration sachets when I go on my long runs and endurance training, which I'm building up towards a few events next year. Snowdon 24 is going to be one of those, and I'll definitely be having some Ketone IQ in my little backpack, camel pack. So they are the sponsor of the podcast. Love the product. Been using it, like I say, for probably close to a year now, and you can get 20% discount off using code Jacko at hvmn.com, and the link in the show notes is going to be hvmn.com/Jacko, and that means that discount code gets automatically applied to anything you put in your cart. So I'm using them, highly recommending them, and I will continue to use them. And I continue to thank HVMN for sponsoring the Between Breaths podcast. We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly, we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast. So let's get into the podcast detail, trying to improve our ability to recover. And I'm going to bring up, for those that haven't ever watched on YouTube, this is probably one where you may want to get, I think on Spotify you get a video as well these days, don't you? So I'm going to pull up the paper here that we're going to talk about. It's one from the Translational Journal of the American College of Sports Medicine, and it's from 2019. And so here's the downloaded version of it. We're looking at the effects of two different recovery postures during high-intensity interval training. I've highlighted some pieces of what I thought was important bits of context for the research and the paper itself, and then we'll get into some nitty-gritty of interpreting this. There were a few things sort of in the introduction that I was very enjoyed seeing. Things like this. It says it's well known that the respiratory system plays a critical role during rest and exercise via buffering metabolic byproducts such as hydrogen ions and carbon dioxide to maintain the acid-base homeostasis and minimizing dysregulation of the excitation contraction coupling process in localized muscle tissue. We know that breathing has an effect on H plus ions and carbon dioxide levels, and so it started. Because I enjoy seeing that, because I still have conversations with people that go, breathing really, like sports people, like professional sports people, going, really, is breathing really going to make that much difference to my performance, my recovery? It's like, yes, it is. It goes on to say that when the respiratory system lacks the ability to increase alveolar ventilation, or exercise-induced diaphragm fatigue kicks in. This is when we start to feel that fatigue, when we can't increase alveolar ventilation, so we can't increase the amount of air that we're able to breathe in and out, as well as potential diaphragm fatigue when that sets in. So, it doesn't go into this, but the study goes into looking at how we can position our posture and our rib cage to allow for the easiest function and movement of the diaphragm. But I also want to talk about, maybe for another podcast, maybe it's a whole podcast on its own, but diaphragm strengthening that diaphragm through a good functional range of motion. And those that have seen me and some of the athletes I'm training with the sports mask on, the Darth Vader mask on, that's one of the things that mask is doing. So maybe there's a whole podcast episode on the sports mask. And it goes on to say in the study, however, in the introduction, new literature has begun to indicate that one can accelerate immediate recovery between exercise bouts by maximizing the surface area of the diaphragmatic zone of apposition. So this is the position of the rib cage that allows for the movement of the diaphragm through its greatest and most functional range, let's say. And it's been shown that the zone of apposition is maximized during spinal flexion rather than spinal extension. Hence why they decided to compare these two positions, which is going to be having your hands placed on your knees, where your spine is going to be a little bit more flexion, and compared to when your hands are on head, that the spine is potentially going to be in a little bit more extension, and the effect that has on the rib cage position, and then therefore the effect that has on the zone of apposition and the movement that the diaphragm is going to go through, and then the ease of which it does. One thing is to say it is comparing two recovery postures, hands on knees versus hands on head. That's all it's comparing. We'll go on to find out that the study is on just females, not males, and we can make an assumption that it's nice actually for once that with research is often just done on males. So, but there is always limitations with one study, and just take those things into mind. And at the end of this, if I say, right, this is better than that, or this is better than that, is fine from this sort of study. But to say the best way to recover is X, when we've only compared two things, is just not. It's not looking at things with the correct lens and in the full spectrum of understanding, what actually this is saying and what actually science is. So just bear in mind, it is comparing just two things. There's one other thing it says in the introduction. So not just the movement of the diaphragm, but also the position of recovery, also potentially influencing autonomic function. So obviously, how your nervous system is controlling things, and particularly heart rate. So how quickly we can recover during exercise. And one of their measures was heart rate recovery. So the speed at which the heart rate would recover. That was one thing they tested. The other thing two other things that they tested was the volume of carbon dioxide they were breathing out, and also the tidal volume, so the size of the breath they were able to take during recovery periods. So what they went on to do was they got 24 female Division II soccer players between the ages of 18 to 22. So quite a specific group. They performed, shows here, they performed exercise, where we're saying subjects performed a total of 2 treadmill sessions of high interval training, separated by 1 week, which consisted of 4 minutes of running and 3 minutes of recovery. And they did 4 sets of that. So basically 4 minutes running, 3 minutes recovery, 4 times. Yeah. and they assumed one of the two recovery positions during those recovery periods to compare the two. Yeah, their main results were hands on knees posture resulted in significantly faster heart rate recovery or decrease in heart rate between intervals than that of when they had their hands on their heads. And their results as a total from this investigation show, this is quote from the literature, show an improved heart rate recovery and greater tidal volume and volume of carbon dioxide when they had hands on knees posture compared to hands on head. So in all three things that they were measuring, hands on knees performed better than hands on head. That can very easily lead us to say, right, well, we should put our hands on the knees anytime that we're recovering because that's the best recovery posture. Well, we don't fully know if it's the best recovery posture. What we do know is it is better than putting your hands on your head if you're a female between 18 and 22. It's probably the same. It's probably going to be better for a male cohort as well. So I'm not trying to be picky. I'm just pointing out a couple of sort of simple things we have to take into consideration. I think one of the main and interesting things for me is that what role does the diaphragm play, and what else can we do understanding some of this data and literature to help us improve our recovery for ourselves or for a coach working with athletes. And so one thing to be aware of is that the diaphragm plays a role in stabilizing our midline. We think of where it attaches onto the spine and the effect it has on the pelvis and on our lower back, so our lumbopelvic hip complex. It is part of that deep core stabilizing structures. When I support myself, put my hands on my knees, or I lie down on the floor and be completely supported, there can be a relaxation around the midsection. There can be less muscular contraction from the diaphragm for stabilizing our posture, and also less trunk stabilization from things like our obliques, which actually slightly restrict our movement of the rib cage out during inhalation. So when I am putting my hands on my knees, yes, that spinal flexion, as they rightly said, is allowing us to have a greater zone of apposition, which is going to affect the volume of air that I can take. But also the fact that I'm supporting, you could try it yourself, put your hands on your knees and try to take a big breath, being fully supported. You put your hands on the desk or table in front of you, or lie down on the floor. Where you're more supported, you will be able to feel the diaphragm moving easier because you've got less contraction from your midsection and things like your obliques that are actually stop the rib cage moving and articulating outwards during an inhale. And you compare that to being stood up, or compare that to being in a plank where you have to really engage your core musculature, and you'll notice that it's much harder to get the ribs to move in the diaphragm. You won't feel it moving as much, or feel the size of the breath, the volume, the tidal volume as being as big. So yes, we may be with hands on knees in a posture that allows for a greater zone of apposition, but equally, how much of it is attributed towards the fact that the diaphragm is only really having to breathe rather than stabilize that midline when you're in that posture. So that, to me, says something really interesting, because that says, or wrapped in across the whole thing, linked to that, is in sport, and this is where we go, let's just go into context of working with athletes and working in sports, and just like what feels good, but also what looks good, is that posture and how you look is a massive thing. Whether you're doing it through the nose or doing it through the mouth is another massive thing. And we haven't even touched on that in this. But what we would ideally like to see is someone that can maintain good body language whilst recovering their breathing in a sporting context, to help them feel better, as well as the messages that's sending out visually to teammates, if they're part of a team, and the opposition. And so what I start to think about is something I said at the start around, I'm going to do a whole separate podcast on, I'm committed to doing that now, around like diaphragm strengthening. If I've got a stronger diaphragm, it's likely to be able to function better even when it is in a slightly compromised position. Because what I want to be able to do, and what I want my athletes to be able to do, is recover really well, even when they're being challenged, or even when they're in less optimal positions. I want them to have versatility that builds resilience, rather than only being able to recover well when everything's perfect. Because most of the time, everything isn't perfect. But what we do is we take note and go, okay, what this is telling me is the more I can support the body so the diaphragm doesn't have to do that work, and maybe get the spine in a position that allows the rib cage alignment, like that's something I've been talking about for a long time. That rib cage alignment makes a massive difference to how well the diaphragm is going to function. So working on those things all the time, and having some drills to help with that, really important type of things that I've got in my courses at probreathwork.com. But this isn't a plug for them. This is for you to understand that when I've finished a training session and when I want to recover and down regulate, getting into a position where my nervous system, my diaphragm, my rib cage can be in a place where we're setting it up to optimally improve that recovery at the end of the session. I would be utilizing this, but I wouldn't go hands on knees. I'd go lying on the floor. I'd go long spine. I'd go knees bent, feet flat on the floor. I'd be going, can I get that rib cage connected down to the floor? And can I feel that nice 3-dimensional expansion from the rib cage and movement of the diaphragm? And yes, you're going to do that. And then the flip side of it is, I'll go, okay, I mean, I haven't done this specifically, but you could argue that, okay, right, this training session, all of our recovery is going to be done. You're going to have, I want you to put your hands on head. You go, why would you do that? You just said that's going to be the worst way. Well, it's going to challenge your ability to recover. And when I challenge your ability to recover, you're going to get better at recovering. Now, that's a silly little example, but hopefully it makes a couple of you pay attention. You know, I wouldn't specifically do that, but there are things that we do to challenge our recovery. Yeah, we could block one nostril, so you create some resistance to the airflow in a good body position. It might not be hands on knees, it might be just upright, knowing that that upright posture is a posture that most people during physical exercise and sports are going to be in, and it's a posture that looks less tired in terms of body language. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, the context of what are you trying to achieve in your session, or if you're a coach in your athlete's session, or the person that you're training, is that's the important thing. When I want them to help them recover as quickly as possible, these are the things we're going to do. When I want to challenge your recovery in training so that you get better at recovering, these are the things we're going to do. Like the sports mask that we use, for example, like providing resistance, and you're re-inhaling exhaled CO2 because it gets trapped in that mask. That is not helping recovery in the short term. It's horrible. It trains that mental resilience. Psychologically, it's like a huge challenge, as well as physiologically, it's creating challenge and stress in the body. But you adapt and then you get better. Your respiratory muscle inhalation, exhalation get stronger. Your body gets used to that restriction and gets adapted. Your body gets used to you re-inhaling some of that CO2 that you've exhaled into the mask, and then you become better adapted to carbon dioxide. You can tolerate more of it. And what it said right back at the beginning of the study was being able to tolerate CO2 and hydrogen ions, which we're going to get more of if we do some sort of breath holding work as well, because of that anaerobic lactate pathway. Then we're exposing the system to all the things we want it to get better at dealing with, so that when we actually go and exercise and perform, it's better at it. That, though, makes recovery and the session harder. So the context of the session is really important. Is this a max out session where I want to, and maybe it's almost like a test. Maybe you're trying to impress your coach. Whatever the situation is, there'll be times there where you'll use everything that I teach to try and make recovery better. You'll use your mouth and you'll dump CO2 in between. You'll use your recovery breathing protocol to get yourself back to nasal, so that helps you with your mindset and your brain function and your decision making and calming of the nervous system before you go again. You might have your hands on your knees to help you recover, but you've got nasal breathing going on. You've got yourself back to nasal after those CO2 dumps. So although your hands are on your knees and you're giving that diaphragm the chance to just fully move rather than stabilize, but you're like poker face. You got that Roger Federer face on, even though the hands are on the knees. So body language wise, you don't look tired. You look like you're ready to go. That would, I mean, that's one side of it. And then there's other times in training where, you make training hard and you make recovery hard. And I think this is one of the things that I hope comes out of this podcast is the appreciation and understanding of, okay, breathing adds an extra whole modality of things that I can use to challenge my system or make the system recover quicker. There's plenty of literature and research out there supporting this, but use it appropriately depending on the context of what you're trying to achieve in your training session. And then you've got an extra tool that most people just aren't using or aren't exploring. They're not there yet. It's coming and it will be there, but get one step ahead. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that's helpful. Ultimately, the study says, sort of rounding this up, the study says, putting your hands on your knees compared to putting your hands on your head, because of the body position, is allowing for easier and better function of the diaphragm. So we get a fuller breath, a larger breath, so the tidal volume was higher. It's calmer for the nervous system to be able to regulate heart rate, and we recover quicker, and we can expel CO2 at a greater rate. That helps get back to that homeostasis. And if we've got a larger tidal volume, so a larger breath, it would make sense that that volume of CO2 expelled is also increased. So it all sort of makes sense, but that may mean that in your next time you're trying to recover, you put your hands on your knees, but it also may mean that you don't. But understanding why you might do it and when you might not do it and why you might do something slightly differently is all about, hopefully, you educating yourself and understanding things, and not searching for the which is better than what, the black and white answer, because actually that makes you quite rigid, doesn't foster variability in your adaptation, or variability in your ability to recover. I want to build resilience. I want to build variation. I want to be able to recover whether I'm standing on my head or whatever. Yeah. So hope that makes sense. Hope that also for me it highlights that that diaphragm, as we would expect, is so important, and the position of the rib cage, super important. The strength of the diaphragm, super important. The study doesn't necessarily say that, but that's what it says to me when you look at it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So I think that is a definite reason as to take a little bit of a deep dive on diaphragm training, which is something I'm doing a lot of at the moment. I'm feeling mega for it, not just during recovery, but during a session itself. So yeah, I'll make a little pact or a little promise with you. The next time I do a podcast on my own without a guest, I'll have I won't have the Darth Vader mask on for the whole thing, so you won't be able to hear me talking, but I'll explain a bit more about that and why we use it, how to use it, and also how to be progressive with it, because it is a challenge. It does get very spicy very quickly, too hot, too spicy. Yeah, it can do, and I've made that mistake myself before as well. So yeah, there we go. Hopefully you've understood a bit around recovery, postures, ribcage position, diaphragm, how you can utilize that understanding to help you either make a more informed decision about what you do with your body and your breathing, during a recovery to either maximize it or challenge it to get better at it at a later date once you've adapted. So I hope that makes sense. Thank you forever for as ever for watching. If you're on YouTube watching it, if you're listening on your Spotify, your iTunes, your whatever your favorite podcast platform is, thank you for listening. I'd love you to leave a review on whatever platform that you're using it on, and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, I'd love to hear if you agree or if you disagree with me. I'd love, if you let's have a healthy debate. If you think that I'm missing something there, if you think I've misinterpreted some of that, if you're curious about the diaphragm work that we're doing, let me know, and I will look forward to taking this discussion a little bit around recovery further, or even widen that, just about how hopefully you've seen that we've looked at one study and tried to take a bit of a broader perspective on it, rather than just go, okay, yeah, it said that, literally at the end, in the conclusion, it said hands on knees is better. Everyone do hands on knees. Like, we didn't say that, and hopefully you appreciate and agree with that approach on sort of reviewing scientific literature. And if you do, I'd love to hear from you. So share it on Instagram. Is probably the biggest social media where I'm most active. Share it on there, tag us in, let us know what you think. And if you have any specific questions, then you can drop me a DM on Instagram. I would love to hear from you. My Instagram is jacko.david.jackson if you're not following yet. And I guess finally, there's been quite a lot of new followers recently. So hello and welcome. If you're listening to the podcast for the first time, a lot of you don't know that I've got 2 free courses on the probreathwork.com website. They're both free. There's 2 of them. The free foundations of breathing. Check that out. I think it's 7 or maybe even 8 modules long. Try to make it very comprehensive, to give you the foundations for absolutely free, because I believe everyone should have the foundations for better breathing and understanding that and be able to do it and practice it and benefit from it. Most people don't need anything more than that. Obviously, I've got other courses and things and trainings that you can do. Some people want to become certified in the Oxygen Advantage. As a master instructor, that's one of the things that I teach, and I'm also one of the mentors and run the mentorship program for other coaches with the Oxygen Advantage. Some people want to go that far with it, but for most of us, just having the foundational basics in place, and they're totally free. Then the other course is Breathwork for Stress and Anxiety, and that's one that's just feels like it needs to be free, because I want to just help people, particularly if you're in that place. Understanding how you're breathing is a reflection of your nervous system, and how your breathing can help you control that nervous system response, that stress and that anxiety. It's really powerful, and if you think you would benefit from that, or someone else would benefit from it, do check out probreathwork.com. Check out those 2 free courses, one for stress and anxiety, and one is just the foundations of breathing. So thank you as ever, and I'm actually really looking forward to this podcast I'm going to do on the diaphragm functioning and strengthening. So look out for that one, and also look out for me running up and down Snowdon again, coming to a mountain near you. That's happening for 2024. Hopefully I get this out before Christmas. Let's say I will get this out before Christmas. It might be the last one before Christmas. If it is, Merry Christmas. I wanted to do a video about a funny one of Dave and Jacko doing. Dave was going to be dressed up as Santa, doing ho ho ho, and basically those hoes being is getting cold hands and feet because he's getting he's dumping off too much CO2 of all his ho ho ho. I haven't got a Santa outfit, so I don't know if I'm going to manage to get that done. I'm going to see if my neighbour will let me borrow. I think he's got a Santa outfit, so I'm going to ask. So if you've listened all the way to the end of this, then you're probably laughing your head off now. But if you do see me and Dave on a little Insta video, and Dave doing some ho ho hoing, and he's dressed as Santa, then you'll know where I got the I've borrowed Santa outfit from my neighbour. Dylan, if you do let me borrow it, thank you, buddy. For everyone else, you've been listening and breathing. I've been Jacko. Until next time, keep it nasal.